All right, hello and welcome to Com 110. My name is Brad Serber, and I am the Director of Public Speaking here at UND. I've been in my job for about a year and a half, and I happen to really like it. I know that some of you are not too excited to be here, and I understand where that's coming from. When I was in your shoes, I was not too excited to take public speaking either. We'll talk a little bit more about my experience with public speaking today, but I want to make this an enjoyable experience for you, even if you're not so sure that this is the right class you want to take right now, or if you're not too excited for it, or if you're feeling a little bit nervous. All of that's pretty normal. I want to start off by telling you a little bit about myself. I already told you that I'm the Director of Public Speaking here. I'm also an assistant professor in the Communication Department. When I'm not teaching public speaking, I'm often teaching graduate seminars on concepts like intercultural conflict or violence, or this semester I'm teaching qualitative research methods. And when I'm not teaching, I spend my time doing a lot of research on communication and violence and communication and abnormality. What I mean by that is that I spend a lot of time looking at how communities cope when there is mass loss, grief, or trauma. And sometimes I also look at who gets to determine what normal means and with what consequences. Oftentimes we use communication to label people. And so if either of those things interest you, I'd be happy to talk to you a little bit more about my work. I'll also tell you that I'm excited to be back in the region. I am a Minnesotan born and raised individual, so I grew up there, did my undergrad there, spent 22 years in Minnesota, went on to Texas A&M for my master's, went on for a doctorate and postdoc at Penn State, landed here last year, and I happen to really like this place a lot. My favorite thing about being here is being with all of you. My students are what give me a lot of energy. I'm very excited to work with you all this semester. I like to get to know my students as best as I can. I know this is a very large setting, and it might be a little bit intimidating. I see a couple of you in the back. We have a couple seats up front here. I'd like you to fill in the seats that are empty, so please come sit. I'll also tell you that it can be a little intimidating seeing such a large crowd in here, but I'll tell you that if you want to get to know me on a first-name basis, I'm a pretty friendly guy. I try not to be too intimidating, so please do come introduce yourself. I'm not the best with names, but I am pretty good with faces, and I'll try to remember who you are. Another thing I'll tell you about myself is that I am very comfortable with awkward silence. My guess is most of you are not. I know that lecture is not always the most exciting part of the college experience, and sometimes it's a lot to sit through when the same person is talking for 50 minutes straight. I don't like talking at you for 50 minutes straight. I like to see my classroom as an interactive space. What that means is you all are going to have to meet me halfway. If you're one of those people who also is not comfortable with awkward silence, there are going to be times in here where I'll pose a question and 300 people will look around and nobody will answer that question. I trust with 300 of you in here, somebody can be brave and raise your hand. We're going to try and break you of the habit of waiting for someone else to answer the question, because if you can speak up in a room like this, you can speak up just about anywhere. So I want to work with you on that. We're going to have some speaking activities today. You probably didn't expect that on your first day of Com 110 lecture that I'm going to have you speak, and you're probably going to wonder how you're going to speak in a room like this. You're not actually going to speak to a whole room like this. We're going to do some speaking activities where you'll start off talking interpersonally to one another. I find that one of the best ways to help students get better and more comfortable at public speaking is to get them talking one-on-one with each other. A lot of you are very comfortable in interpersonal settings like that. You get less comfortable the more people we add to that mixture. So we're going to have our first speaking activity today. You won't be called to the front of the room. I don't plan on calling any of you to the front of the room at any point this semester. But I do want you to get comfortable speaking and speaking up and having ideas and sharing those ideas. Now, I told you a little bit about myself. I also want to tell you a little bit about how we've restructured Com 110 since I got here. Some of you probably have friends who have taken Com 110 in the past. Maybe they've told you some things about the course. Maybe they've told you some things about me. I'm happy to address anything that you might have heard. Some of it may be true. Some of it may be not so true. I want you to form your own first impressions of me and your own impressions of the course. But a couple of things that you should know are how we've restructured the course. When I took over in last fall, the course looked very differently. We didn't have a lecture lab format. That was probably the biggest change that we added. Lecture lab format allows me to teach you all the history and theory of public speaking. You all either have had lab already or will have lab in the near future. Well, you'll go with your lab instructor. I'll tell you that you all are my students in one section of lecture that I have. I happen to have another section of lecture that looks just like this with all 300 students in there. So I have about 600 or a little bit more than 600 students this semester. I'm also teaching a graduate seminar like I mentioned, so there are a lot of you and only one of me. The reason why we have a lecture lab set up is so that I can teach you concepts about public speaking, and then you can go to lab and actually engage in the practice of public speaking. So you all will meet your lab instructors. Your lab instructors are going to be the ones who grade all of your assignments for this course. The reason for that is to keep everything centralized. You probably don't want me grading 600 speeches every time that you give a speech. It's a lot easier when your lab instructor gets to do that. The other thing that's nice about that is in your lab sections, it'll feel a little bit more homey. It'll be a little bit more comfortable. You'll get to meet some new people. You'll probably know those people pretty well because one of the things about public speaking is that it's very personal. Oftentimes people will choose subjects that are interesting to them, and they will talk about those subjects, and you'll get to know people pretty well. You'll also get to know your lab instructor very well, and that also works in your favor. I see you once a week, they see you twice a week, they see you in a much more intimate setting. They're going to be the ones grading all of your assignments. So if you have questions about grades for your lab instructor, make sure you direct those to your lab instructor. The one exception to that is if you have already gone to your lab instructor, you've maybe submitted a grade appeal, you didn't think that the lab instructor graded you fairly on your speech, you can then talk to the lab instructor. I will only talk to you once you have already talked to your lab instructor. And oftentimes I will try to see things from both points of view and I'll try to back you up. But for the most part, you will be interacting with your lab instructors. I've been working very closely with them, most of them for 2 years now, teaching them how to teach, teaching them how to grade. We want to keep all of the grading for COM 110 centralized so that you don't have your lab instructor saying one thing and me saying another thing. If you find that that happens at any point, go with what your lab instructor says over what I say. I'm giving you permission to do that, again, because the lab instructor is the one grading you, and I know that grades are very important to all of you. Now, the other part of that is be mindful of your communication. You will, A, want to be respectful when talking to your lab instructor and to me. I try to lead from behind, and I see my lab instructors as good instructors. I try to treat them with the highest level of respect. I try to lead from behind, so don't be nice to me and mean to them. The other thing that goes along with that is I have 600 plus students emailing me on the regular. I actually had to turn off the push notifications on my phone last fall because I was getting PTSD because I was getting about an email a minute, and I was jerking from all of those emails. A lot of those emails can be better directed toward your lab instructor first and to me second. So please, please, please try to communicate as much as possible with your lab instructor. They're going to also introduce themselves. You'll get to know them pretty well. I want to make sure that you're working with them well. So the lecture lab setup is one of the changes that we made. Another change that we made is that we tried to take communication and public speaking and move them into the 21st century. A lot of classes around the world have public speaking, and it's usually you get up and you deliver your speech to a room of 20 or 25 or 30 people. And that model works pretty well, but if each of you are giving 3 speeches over the course of the semester, what ends up happening is we spend a lot of class time with you all listening to the same speeches over and over and over again. Your instructors are listening to the same speeches over and over again. So we are taking public speaking and turning it digital. What that means is that you all will be recording your speeches and you will be giving them live, but you and your instructor will also have a digital copy of your speeches. I'll tell you that some of you probably don't like the idea of being recorded. I'll tell you also that I've built in peer and self-evaluation, so you'll be watching each other's speeches. You also will be watching your own speeches. Part of the reason for that is because one of the best things that you can do to get better as a public speaker is to watch yourself on video. A lot of us have it in our heads that a speech that we give goes much worse in our head than it did from the audience's perspective. You will get to see that firsthand from the audience's perspective, and you'll realize, I took this long pause. I thought it was 30 seconds. It was only like a second and a half. I stuttered in this one point. I thought it was really obvious. It was really embarrassing. Doesn't look so bad on the video. You'll find that it'll actually ease your communication apprehension to see what you look like, because most of us actually have some pretty good public speaking habits. And even those things that we still want to work on, we can work on, but you might not even know that you're doing some of those things. So you're going to be recording your speeches. You're also, by nature of recording your speeches, going to be giving them in smaller groups. So one of the things that's really nice about the lecture lab setup that we have is our lab upstairs, if you haven't been there already. The Digicom lab is new. It used to be a library. When I came in to interview for my job, it was a whole bunch of bookshelves with no books on them because they were clearing it out to make room for us. The Digicom lab has 2 stations in each quadrant. That is where your classrooms are. Those 2 stations will allow you to have 2 groups giving and recording their speeches at the same time. which means you won't be giving your speeches, your first two speeches to the full class. You'll be delivering them in small groups of 6 to 8. So you might feel better about that you don't have to deliver to a large crowd, but you also will have the opportunity to do that at the end of the semester. Your final project for this class is going to be a small group deliberation where you and your team will lead a full group presentation that you will deliver to your whole class so you can still have that experience. So those are just a couple of the changes that we've made to this course in order to make it more user-friendly for you and to help offset the experience. One of the things that's also really nice about the Digicom Lab is that on the days that you are not speaking, delivering your major speeches, when your classmates are giving their major speeches, you don't have to be there listening to 35 speeches over and over and over again. So that's a little bit of a gift to you. That's one of the changes that we've made to try to make this class more user-friendly for you. There's a couple of things that you'll need in order to make all of this happen, and the first of them is a textbook. Now, it's not the textbook that you see up here. I'll tell you that when I took over this class cost students $80 a person. There was a $40 spiral-bound textbook. I'll tell you that I didn't really care for that textbook so much, so I decided I was going to write my own. You all have access to that textbook free of charge, thanks to me. I've uploaded it to your Blackboard sections. The textbook is called Finding Your Voice, Public Speaking in Context. It is your resource for the semester. It's available for free as a PDF. All you got to do is download and read it. I was floored last semester when one of my lab instructors came to me around week 6 and overheard a conversation where one of her students said, "Wait, we have a textbook for this class?" The exam was coming up a week and a half later. They didn't even know they had a textbook. Please do read the textbook. That textbook alone is saving you $40 a person. The other $40 came from two other things that we had. One was a video recording software program that we were using to record speeches. That was $20 a person. I found one that's available for free. So my sections are using Yuja. Some of your sections might be using VoiceThread or YouTube, but you'll have some kind of video recording software. What that means is you're going to need some kind of device that you can record on, whether that's a phone, a tablet, a laptop, something that you can record on. I'm saving you $20 there. The other $20 that we had was for clickers. We had clickers for lecture to help you with the content and to take attendance. I found that the clickers were a massive headache for me. I found that the value wasn't really useful for the students. We've decided to replace those clickers with just taking old-fashioned attendance. So I'm not going to take attendance today. I assume you're all here because you want to be here. But starting next week, we're going to have attendance in here, and I'll just report the attendance to your lab instructors. It's important for you to know which section that you're in and who your lab instructor is. If you don't remember that, you might want to take a picture of your schedule to put on your phone. We will have attendance available at the front of the room when you get here, and you can just sign in once you get here. The reason for that is it's, again, saving you another $20. So the class was $80. It is now free. I will say you're welcome for that. The other thing that you're going to need is internet access so that you can watch each other's speeches and watch your own speeches. All of our video recording software is going to be digitally based, so you want to make sure you have that as well. A couple more things about the course. I think I've covered most things. Anything that I haven't covered here should be available to you in your syllabus. You should have received a copy of your syllabus somewhere, whether that's hard copy or on Blackboard. You all should have a copy of your syllabus. I know that it's not the coolest thing in the world to read. I know that it can be a little bit tedious. It kind of resembles technical communication, which we'll talk about later on in the semester. That is probably the single most important thing that you can have today. That I see as your contract for this course. I want you all to recognize that you've signed up to take a class, and all of the responsibilities, all of the grading, all of the scheduling is available there. One of professors' biggest pet peeves generally is when students ask the same question over and over again. It's a question that they already answered in the syllabus. So there's a professor you'll see here. It's not me. It's not anyone related to me. But he rips off his shirt in the middle of the lecture and says, "It's in the syllabus." Make sure that you read your syllabus because it's your contract for this course this semester. It will answer a lot of your questions. Again, if you can't answer those questions, try to answer them on your own. Then go to your lab instructor. If your lab instructor can't answer that, come to me. Most things that you'll need to know are in there, so I'm not going to go into detail about that. I was a little horrified when I was at Penn State, and my students would refer to this week as syllabus week, which just seemed like a massive waste of time. I think you all are capable of reading, or you wouldn't be here, so I want to make sure that you all read that. Ask questions for your lab instructor if you happen to have them. Now, aside from that, I want to know, what are some things that brought you here? Why are you taking this course in the first place? Anybody want to volunteer? Why are you here? Because it's required. Raise your hand if you are here because it's required. Number one answer, show me required. I've been teaching this class for 9 years. I know that most of you probably would not be here were it not for the university requiring you to take this class. I recognize as an instructor that that's an uphill battle for me. A lot of people don't like taking public speaking. A lot of people don't like taking required classes. A lot of people are nervous for public speaking. Unlike some of your other classes here, this is also primarily a skills-based class, and I use the word primarily there, emphasis on primarily, because we do a lot more than just give you skills for becoming a better public speaker. We're also trying to teach you some of the history of public speaking. There's a lot of good advice. There's a lot of bad advice from the last 2,500 plus years of public speaking. So I want to make sure that you all are well-rounded in that. I also want to make sure that you all are able to speak about things that you care about. Your textbook is titled Finding Your Voice. I want to help you find your voice in a variety of contexts. Some of those contexts will be professional. Some of those will be civic or community-oriented when you're speaking up and trying to make change happen, whether that's in political situations or in groups that you're a part of. A lot of you will give ceremonial speeches. Almost all of you will have a wedding or some kind of life cycle event over the course of your lives. You'll want to make sure that you're well prepared for that, so I want to help you find your voice. I also see it as one of my main challenges, but also the most fun part of my job, to make a class that a lot of people aren't too excited about taking enjoyable, and to make it something that you all can survive and be proud of. So I know that a lot of you are here because it's required, and that's okay. I'm hoping by the end of the semester you will see the value in this class beyond just the university made me take it and it checked off a box and now I get to graduate. Can anybody say any other reasons why you're here besides this one? It's okay if you can't, but I'm curious, what other reasons do you have for being here? Okay, so you want to learn different techniques. It's that skills-based thing, but you also said a key word there, confidence. A lot of people are not very confident, even privately speaking, let alone publicly speaking. I want to help you build your confidence. A lot of you are young adults, and this is the perfect time in your life, if you are a young adult, to start seeing yourself as an adult and start speaking like you're an adult. Other reasons why you're here. Yeah?
I'm on the speech and debate thing at UND, so I figured I might.
Awesome. So you're on the speech and debate team here. That's really exciting. I'm glad that you're doing that. So I hope that a lot of the skills that we have will transfer to that. I've tried to structure our public speaking class around a lot of history of public speaking, so a lot of those concepts should overlap. Good. Anybody else? One more. Yeah. Awesome. Raise your hand if you either have declared a major that is in education or are thinking about a major in education. A handful of you. That's probably what I figured. It's funny to me that a lot of people don't see public speaking as a part of education, and yet if you are teaching, most days that you teach, you're going to be engaging in public speaking. A lot of teaching is public speaking, just by another name, so that's good. Thank you all for sharing that. I'm glad to see that there are other reasons for you being here. If you don't yet have an answer to that question, I'd like you to continue to think about what other answers you could give to that question, because nobody likes that number one answer, even if that's why we're all here. There's another part of this class that I really want to get into today, and that is the idea of communication apprehension. You might know communication apprehension by a bunch of other names. Some people call it speech anxiety or speech apprehension. If you're in theater or music, some people refer to it as stage fright. It's that feeling of anxiety, that feeling of butterflies in your stomach, nervousness, the jitters, that a lot of people get when they're just about to go speak. And this is a really common phenomenon. A lot of people experience communication apprehension. Some people experience it only when they're doing public speaking. Other people will experience it in interviews. Some of you might experience it, let's say, if you get pulled over by a police officer and ask you, do you know why I pulled you over? And you just freeze up and you don't even know how to respond and you just start crying. Communication apprehension is a pretty common phenomenon. I like to think of it in a bunch of different ways. One of the ways of thinking about it is this political cartoon that I find pretty funny. There's a fear of speaking support group, and nobody's willing to talk because they're all afraid of public speaking. Sometimes communication apprehension can feel like this, where you're standing behind a podium and you see a whole bunch of eyes looking at you, and you feel really small, and there's a spotlight on you, and all of the people suddenly feel really big and scary. That's sometimes how communication apprehension feels. There's a reason why I don't use podiums in my public speaking classroom. I think the podium itself actually contributes to this a little bit. I find my students much more relaxed when they hold their outlines in their hands. That's up to you. That's up to your lab instructor. Sometimes communication apprehension can also make people want to hide under a podium. So you might feel like you're really scared, and once you get up there, you say, I don't want to do this. I've had students in the past pass out in the middle of their speeches, throw up before their speeches, have really bad headaches and not be able to show up on speech day. There's lots of reasons why people will flake out at the last minute. I want to help you all take care of yourselves so that that doesn't happen to you, so that you're able to get up and speak. And I also have a secret for you. When I started teaching about 9 years ago, I was teaching public speaking, and the secret that I have is that I have a history of communication apprehension. Prior to when I started teaching, I was taking public speaking at the University of Minnesota. I was in your shoes. I was very afraid to do it. And I took the class. It was at 8 o'clock in the morning, so that just added to my communication apprehension. I'm like, what happens if my alarm doesn't go off? What happens if I don't have time to get coffee before class? I started having really severe communication apprehension in high school after a particular speech that didn't go well in high school, and pretty much every speech I gave after that went really poorly. I was very lucky that I had my public speaking instructor as an undergrad. I actually thank her in the acknowledgement section of your textbook. Her name was Alyssa Isaacs. She helped me overcome that communication apprehension. That's something that I want to pass on to you. That's part of why I took this job in the first place. Now, I'll tell you, when I started teaching about 9 years ago, my public speaking director then was a woman who said that you shouldn't talk to your students about communication apprehension. You shouldn't talk to them because if you tell them that they're supposed to be scared and they're not scared, it's going to make them more scared. Now, that just never made sense to me. I found that having a label for it, being able to understand my condition was really helpful. And you'll see that I wouldn't be in my shoes today if I hadn't gotten over that communication apprehension. There will still be times where you will see signs of nervousness from me, but I look very differently from when I gave speeches in high school and college. I'll tell you that there was a speech that I gave in high school once where I was so nervous that 45 minutes after I gave my speech, I was still shaking vigorously, and people asked me if I needed to go to the nurse. That's how scared I was of public speaking. You all might be pretty scared of public speaking. I'm here as living proof that public speaking is something that can be taught. It can be taught to just about anybody, and you can learn to do it really well. I'm also realizing I'm getting over a bit of a cough, so bear with me for a second as I drink. I had a bad feeling that was going to happen. Thank you. So you all will be able to get over your communication apprehension if you have it. If you don't feel like you have it now, there may be a point later on this semester where you feel like maybe you've developed it, or maybe a particular speech brings it on for you. Now, there's lots of good advice out there for overcoming communication apprehension, so I want to get into some of that advice so I can help you. Regardless of whether you feel it now, you may feel it at some point over the course of the semester. So this is another one of those times where I'm going to pose a question to the whole class, and I'm going to ask you if you have stories, a history of communication apprehension, if you've struggled with it, what does it feel like for you? Maybe over time you've developed some strategies for how to overcome communication apprehension. Does anybody fit into any of those categories? Can anybody share their experience with communication apprehension? Go ahead.
Yeah, in high school, I gave a speech in freshman year or something. My knees were shaking a lot, and my filler was on it, and almost every 3 seconds. It was really bad.
Yep. Okay, so you can think of a particular speech that was maybe didn't go so well because of your communication apprehension. He mentioned that his knees were shaking a lot. One of the best pieces of advice I have for you, just from a general health standpoint, is if you're engaged in public speaking, keep your knees a little bit loose. Never lock your knees. If you lock your knees, that's usually the one thing that will make you pass out in the middle of your speech. So make sure you have a little bit of room to stretch your knees a little bit. Anybody else want to share any strategies or stories? Yeah. It's actually really funny that you mentioned rocking back and forth. I took public speaking as an undergrad, and I had to record my speeches as well back in the Stone Age when we used VHS tapes, and I plugged my VHS tape into my VCR, and the first thing I saw was that during my whole speech I was swaying like this. I had no idea I was doing it, but it's good to catch yourself on video because that probably was a nervous tic. There are other reasons why that probably happened that we'll get into in a few weeks. Anybody else want to share anything? I know it's kind of like that cartoon with the support group where if you have communication apprehension, you're probably the least likely to talk. Does anybody have any strategies for overcoming it? Yeah. Good, yeah, so having a good relationship with your instructor, having a good relationship with your classmates can be a really good way to overcome it. If you're comfortable with your audience, you will find ways to get comfortable speaking in front of that audience. I taught my lab section this morning, and I tried to tell my students that one of my favorite things about teaching public speaking is I get to know them as people. But part of what's also great about it is they bond and they form community. So I still have friends from my public speaking class well over a decade ago. I still occasionally talk to my public speaking instructor. Having a good relationship with your lab instructor can be really helpful. The other thing I told my lab section is that I see it as a judgment-free zone. There are a lot of times in this class where you all will look stupid, and if there's anything I've learned from teaching college students is that the number one fear is not public speaking, it's looking stupid in front of other people. There will be lots of moments where everyone in this room will look stupid at some point. That includes me. There are going to be lots of moments in here where I look stupid. I have a bad habit of leaving things that I'm going to trip over. So sometimes you'll see me stumble over my bag. That happens. Sometimes I get caught up and my brain gets ahead of the words coming out of my mouth and I have to slow down a little bit. It all happens. The important thing is that we learn how to recover when it does happen. And that recovery skill is really helpful. The other thing I told my students is I want it to be a judgment-free zone. So what happens in this classroom stays in this classroom. If somebody happens to embarrass themselves, recognize that it's not easy to be in a vulnerable position talking in front of a large group of people, and try to cut your classmates some slack, and hopefully they'll cut you some slack as well. So I told you a little bit about my experience with communication apprehension. I told you how nervous I was. I want to get into some strategies, so I would recommend that you take some good notes here. Even if you don't feel like you have communication apprehension, sometimes it comes on for no reason or for a particular reason later on in your life. You'll probably want to make sure that you're taking good notes generally in this class because there's a lot of material here that will be useful to you later on. The title of the class is Fundamentals of Public Speaking. Fundamentals of Public Speaking. So these are things that will serve you for the rest of your life.
Is this material that we need to use for our speeches?
Both. Yep. So the material that I'm giving you here in lecture is the history and theory of public speaking. The history is going to tell you some of how people started talking about public speaking and how their ideas about public speaking have changed over the last few centuries. But also the theories that I'm giving you, the ideas that I give you in here are practical tips designed to help you give better speeches. So the first one I have for you is to understand the source of your anxiety or apprehension. I told you that for me, it was a particular speech that I gave in middle school or high school. It was like 8th or 9th grade, and it just did not go well. I didn't prepare for it well. I read the whole thing off my paper. I was shaking the whole time. I felt like I was incoherent. It took me a long time to get through it. I had a whole bunch of verbal fillers. And I figured that every time that I got up to speak, no matter how well prepared I was, it was going to be that same disaster again because I felt like, well, it went poorly this time and I thought it was going to go so well and it didn't. What I had to realize is that every time I got up to speak again after that, each speaking situation was different. I had a new speech, I had a new topic, I had a different audience. Nobody knew my history of the previous speech that I had given a year or 2 or 5 years ago. The only speech that mattered was the one that I was about to give and not some other speech that I was still worried about and still letting myself be traumatized by. So if you can understand where your communication apprehension is coming from, that's usually a good start toward figuring out how you might deal with it, how you might respond to it. Another strategy that I have for you is a lot of people are their own worst enemy, and they have a whole bunch of negative thoughts. It's very uncommon to have anxiety or nightmares the night before you give your speech, where you're naked or you are not prepared for your speech or you can't remember the lines or it just doesn't go as planned. A lot of people also have lots of negative thoughts about themselves right before their speech. I don't know that it's necessarily connected to self-esteem. It's probably just a matter of your nerves getting the best of you.
But just like writing pro-con lists, if you can write out positive things that you're excited about with your speech, that will help you make your speech more enjoyable for yourself and your audience. It will also help you see how to deliver your speech in the way that you want to give it. So maybe you have a really good attention getter or introduction. Maybe you're really excited to share your topic with your audience. No matter what speech you're giving, there's always something positive about the speech. There's always something positive about you as the speaker as well. So what are some things that are your strengths, and how can you play to those strengths? Try to counteract negative thoughts that you might have with positive ones. A third one that I have for you, and we'll get more into this in about 2 weeks, is to make really good outlines. And I say outlines plural. A lot of you hear the word outline and you freak out. A lot of people don't like writing outlines. They find it really tedious and boring. There are two particular types of outlines that we're going to write for this class. One's called a preparation outline, and it's the full version of your entire speech written out word for word. That is not the speech that you will use on speech day. Your outline that you will use on speech day is what we call a speaking outline. It's a condensed version of that. Both of those outlines are going to be really important for helping you give better speeches. Part of why that speech I gave in middle school didn't go so well is because I didn't know you could do different kinds of outlines like this. And having the process, what we're going to call extemporaneous speaking, was really helpful for that. Another one that was really important for me, and probably the best piece of advice that I got from my public speaking instructor when I took this class as an undergrad, was to think of your speech not as a performance, but instead as a conversation. What that means is that a lot of people, if they're about to go play an instrument, if they have a solo, if they're acting, if they're public speaking, if they're doing anything in front of a large group of people, we often have performance anxiety that's very different sometimes from communication apprehension and very similar to it other times. So you want to think of your speech not as a performance, but instead as a conversation. When I started teaching public speaking, I said, oh gosh, I have this history with communication apprehension. How am I going to get up every day for 45, 50, 75 minutes and talk to a room of 25 strangers? And on the first day of class, what I did is I found a friendly face in the audience. And I talked to that friendly face for a second or two until that person realized I was talking to them. It's really uncomfortable, isn't it? And then I found another friendly face over here, and I talked to that person for a little while until they realized it. And then I'd maybe find a friendly face over here, and I'd be talking to one person at a time instead of the whole sea of 25 or 300 people. A lot of us can do really well having conversations one-on-one as individuals. So try and translate that conversational skill to your public speaking when you have more than one person in your audience. Another strategy I have for you is to relax. Remember to breathe. It seems really ridiculous. You've probably already heard it from me today. I've been working on this for well over a decade. We all need to breathe in order to live. It should be obvious to us that we need to stop, inhale, exhale, give ourselves some time to breathe and to process. A lot of us get so excited about speaking that we just word vomit a whole bunch of stuff really quickly all at once, and we just don't stop talking, and then suddenly our breath catches up with us and we take this giant It's awkward. So you actually have to remind yourself to pause and breathe anytime that you'd have a comma, anytime that you'd have a period. Slow down a little bit. It'll actually help you. It'll also help your audience digest what you're listening to. Another thing that I have for you is to visualize success. A lot of people will visualize failure, and they'll say, no matter what I do, it's just going to be a disaster. If you actually ask yourself to picture what it would look like to give the best speech that you could, and to get the best reaction you could out of your audience, that's also another good way to make sure that your speech actually matches what you think your speech is going to be. So for instance, if you have a joke that you want to tell, imagine your audience laughing at that joke. If you want to stand with good posture, picture yourself with good posture. If you want to make sure that you stop and breathe, try to imagine what a successful speech would look like. Try to imagine what it would feel like to finish your speech and have your audience clap for you. Those are some other good ways to help you get in the mindset that will prepare you for making that speech something that's worthy of giving. The most important strategy I have for you is to get an early start and to do a lot of practicing. A lot of people will wait until the last minute to start writing their speeches. Part of what we're going to spend our next few weeks on is the process from beginning to end of writing, organizing, polishing, practicing, and eventually giving your speech. A lot of people will wait until the night before to give their speech, and I can tell you right now that I and your lab instructors can tell if you haven't put much thought into your speech until about 30 hours ago. You also probably will not do very well because a lot of people who stay up to write their speeches the night before are not particularly good at engaging in practices of self-care. So I'll tell you a horror story, and I say this not to scare you, but to help you avoid problems. A few years ago, I was in between classes. I had just finished teaching, and a bunch of students came running up to me, even though I wasn't their instructor, in the hallway because the student had passed out and hit her head. And I had to take this student and bring her to the hospital. And I asked her what was going on. She said, well, I was supposed to give a speech today for my friend's class. She was giving the speech. She stayed up all night writing it. She had multiple shots of espresso. She got no sleep. She didn't drink anything. She didn't eat anything. And she passed out in the hallway before her speech was one that she had to give. So I want to remind you all that public speaking is not just about the practice of public speaking, but it's also about good self-care practices. The earlier you can start, the more likely it is that public speaking will be part of your normal routine, and you won't encounter those situations where you're not taking good care of yourself and not really doing the best job to give your speech. So those are just some ideas for you to help you get over communication apprehension. I've got lots of other ones. I will say that when it comes to communication apprehension, there is not a one-size-fits-all policy. You're going to have to figure out what works best for you. One of the things that I didn't put up here was color coding ideas. I'm a visual learner, so I had different things in different colors, and you'll see that in a few weeks as well. Now, I told you that I also want to spend some time giving you all practice public speaking today. It's not really public speaking so much as it is for you to have an opportunity to speak interpersonally with one another. So we're going to do an exercise that's become one of my favorites over the last few years. In the late 90s and early 2000s, there was this horrible phenomenon called speed dating, where singles would get together, they'd have this really long table, and you'd sit facing another person, and you'd talk to that person, and there'd be a timer. Usually the timer was 2 minutes or so. If you liked that person by the end of those 2 minutes, you'd give them your number, or maybe you'd follow up with them later. Before you all put your stuff away, that's one of my big pet peeves. What I want you to do is actually to face somebody else in the room. You're going to meet up with somebody in this room. I'm going to put a question up on the board. You're going to talk to that person for a minute or two. You're going to respond to the question that's up on the board. I will dim the lights when I'm ready to switch questions. We'll do this a few times so that you all get comfortable with the practice of public speaking. So go ahead and find a partner and answer the question that's up on the board. All right. I actually want you to stand up, move around the room, meet people you otherwise wouldn't meet. We're going to switch questions. It's going to go fast. Next question. I told you we were going to move fast. Find a new partner and then go on to the next question. New partner, new question. New partner, new question. We'll do one more. There's a correct answer to this one. The correct answer is the speed bump. Last question. Hi. What's your name?
Michael.
Michael, nice to meet you.
What are you most excited for? I should not have got this question.
It's all good. I'm not your lab instructor.
General speaking skills.
Okay.
Universal.
Fair enough.
In the job.
Yeah.
What are you looking forward to?
I'm excited to get to know my students. My favorite part of this job is getting to know my students as people and not just as numbers.
I'm not excited. I like lab classes.
Okay.
And
Cool.
Like you said, it's a little more intimate.
Yeah.
I like that.
Cool.
I'm not speaking for like
300 people. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. I'll tell you the thing I'm not excited about is all the grading I'm going to have to do. So that's fair. All right, go ahead and have a seat. I want to debrief this with you. Go ahead and have a seat. My voice is going to be gone. So there are no right or wrong answers to this question, but the question is for you to just be honest. How did that feel, talking one-on-one with somebody? Okay, it felt more comfortable. Another feeling. How did it feel? How did it feel?
I felt great. I mean, it felt nice, just like
All right.
know somebody.
Felt nice. You got to know somebody new. Any negative feelings we had? I always find the exercise a little awkward, personally. I'm okay with that. I'm an awkward guy. But you all survived that. You all survived your first public speaking experience. It might not have felt like a public speaking experience, but you were talking to one person. But there were 300 other people, and any one of them could have listened to any of those answers, and some of those questions could have gotten some difficult answers. I want you to realize that there's not a whole lot of difference between speaking interpersonally and speaking publicly. Yes, there are some key differences. Yes, those differences are important. But if you're able to survive an exercise like that, then you can survive speaking in front of 20 or 25 people. My guess is most of you, if not all of you, could survive speaking in front of this entire room, especially by the end of the semester. I also want to recognize that we're in a difficult position, that we have about 16 or 17 weeks together, depending on whether you count finals week. I can teach you just about everything I know about public speaking, and there's a lot that I've accumulated over the last 9 years. I also recognize that public speaking is a lifelong skill, and it's one that you've got to keep practicing. So I'm going to give you lots of tools, but I want you to take those tools and don't just say this is a once and done class. I took it once in college, I checked off a box. You will come back to your notes from this class many times over the course of your lifetime. That's my hope. You also have me and your lab instructor as a resource if later down the road you have a job interview, or you have a wedding toast that you're going to give, or you have some other speech that's going to be useful to you. So even if this first exercise seemed a little bit awkward, even if you really enjoyed it, no matter how you felt about it, you all survived it. So I want you to give yourselves a quick round of applause. And I trust that even if you do have some communication apprehension, that you can survive that. If you do find yourself with communication apprehension, I want you to talk to your lab instructor, because they can be incredibly helpful to you. You can also make an appointment to come talk to me during office hours. Just be mindful of the fact that I have about 600 students this semester. But again, part of why I took this job is to help students like you succeed in a skill that a lot of people find really challenging, and a skill that a lot of people don't really like doing. I recognize I'm fighting an uphill battle in this class, and I am willing to have that fight. I've had it every semester that I've taught. So I want to thank you all for a good first class, and I'm excited to work with you all over the rest of the semester.